Hi, everybody. My name is Eric Raff. I teach in Canyon, Texas, and I recorded the high school keyboard percussion audition music, which is a separate YouTube video. So, in this video, I wanted to talk about a few of the things that I found to be helpful in planning out working up the music and being able to play the music well enough that if I was going to audition, it would be good. So, what I have here on the screen is a copy of the PDF of the actual music. And I went through and I made some markings on the music for stickings that I used on the video. As with stickings for any piece of music, there are different ways to approach playing with different stickings. And so a different teacher percussionist might come back and say, oh, I wouldn't have used that sticking. That doesn't mean that my stickings are bad or theirs are better or vice versa. It just means that there are different preferences that come up with this sort of thing. So I'm going to show you what I did. This is what I'd be teaching my students to do as well. And I will try to explain a little bit of why I chose those stickings. I really think what I chose sticking wise is pretty normal stuff. So I don't think that there's a whole lot of controversy surrounding those. Now, one thing I noticed with this etude is that it is trickier than it looks for a couple of reasons. The first one is the left hand starts a lot of passages and is really the first hand that attacks, even just in smaller phrases. So if you look at measure 1 and 2 here, let's see if there's a way for me to highlight that. The answer is no. If you look at measure 1 and 2, then what you'll see is that even that little phrase starts with the left hand, the next phrase starts with the left hand, the next phrase starts with the left hand. So one of the reasons it was a little bit tricky for me is I'm right-handed, and so I want to start things on the right. I will even take something that might fit a little bit easier on the left, and I'll kind of, I don't know, flip a note here or there, or double a right or a double left to get it over onto the right hand. And in this case, just the way it's written and the way things start left and move to the right, you have to do that with the sticking. So I found that to be a tricky part to playing it. I also felt like the tempo, although it's a very sensible tempo to request, 60 beats per minute, is faster than where it feels comfortable for me personally. And maybe that's just me, maybe that's not everybody, but I felt like I wanted to play the piece really confidently at about 50. And then when I tried to push it up to 60, it really got challenging. So let that be a lesson that when you're learning this music, you don't need to try it at tempo. In fact, the first few times that I really worked through just trying to kind of figure out where the tricky passages were, or, kind of look for some things that maybe looked really easy but did not fit under the hands as well, I think I played at about 40 beats a minute. So I was pretty well under tempo to make sure that I was comfortable with the decisions that I was making. Something that might catch you off guard is that it's in 6/8 time. And it's not that 6/8 time, like any time signature, is difficult to play. But if you're less familiar with that time signature, then yeah, you might have some trouble with it. And then the last thing is it's in the key of F. And a lot of times students, especially 8th graders becoming 9th graders, maybe have not done a whole lot in the key of F. Maybe they know that scale really well, which will be helpful here. But maybe they're just not as comfortable reading the notes in the key of F. Well, this is a great way to get better at doing it. So don't reach for those E flats unless you see it as an accidental. So the first 2 lines are really straightforward. If you're using a metronome and it's at a true 6/8 metronome parameter, so it's clicking 6 beats and you're hearing a difference on count 1 versus count 4, 5, and 6, it should be pretty easy to figure out what's going on in the first 2 lines. Follow the stickings I have there, see if those work for you. They should be pretty universal. Now, on the second line, variation 1, or the second part, variation 1, it's still very left-hand based, and you'll see that in the first 3 phrases, right? Variation 1 is a phrase of 2 measures, or a micro phrase of 2 measures, and then 2 more measures, and then 2 more measures. So you're going to see all of those starting the left hand. The only exception is the last 2 measures of variation 1 work better coming off the right, and you can see that flow. Note is up on the right, things move down to the left. All of that single alternating strokes will carry you through if you'll start on the right hand. There's one little feature that I found myself coming back to over and over. And it's something that honestly I don't do a lot in my playing, nor do I find myself teaching it, but I found that it works really well here. And that is to switch the alignment of the mallets. Okay. So you can watch this on the video, and I probably should have looked up what time it is and like marked it on the screen for where exactly to look. But at the beginning of variation 9, you're playing just single left hand alternating strokes. You come back to the B flat and your mallets are here. Right hand further away from you, left hand closer to you. At least that's how I felt coming off of the I felt with the right hand made sense to lead away from my body and to roll like this. So I found myself in that 8th rest switching from this configuration to this configuration just to allow the next note, the A, to be on the right hand, which keeps the left hand on the B flat. So B flat, rest, and I switched. Now it's just a real quick motion, and then roll, and then bring the A or the right hand down for the A. Now, if I'd had more time to prepare, I would probably try to take myself into a situation where I came off and somehow came off that C and got to that position where the left was further away from me than the right. I would maybe try to do that more in my playing. So that's something to explore too. And you may play this and be like, man, what was he even talking about? I'm not having any problems with that at all. But that's one thing I found myself having to do to just kind of convincingly set my hands up for the next phrase. All stickings in keyboard music should consider what you have to do, where you've come from, and where you're going. So when you have a great sticking selection and you're like, okay, this is going to work perfectly, can you actually get into it easily? And does it serve the music that's coming after that? So that's something you always have to think about when you're picking stickings. And that's why I think it's so important that when you're practicing something, that once you get comfortable with the sticking, you go ahead and mark it so that you always come back to that same sticking. Okay. While I have the mallets in my hands, you can see above my head that I pulled up. This is a Innovative Percussion IP275N. This is from the soloist line. And one thing I like about it is, the 240, the IP240 is kind of like the middle mallet in that line. It's a great all-purpose mallet, but because this is a 2-mallet etude that tends to be on the upper half to upper third of the keyboard, I wanted something with a little bit more bite. I also now I didn't buy these looking for a natural handle. This does not have any kind of gloss on the mallet. It's natural, which means they did not go back through and do any kind of varnish on the shaft. I really like it because it feels like I have a better grip on the mallets. And this may be me again and not you, but on mallets that have that real glossy or like varnished, it's not varnish, but it's like a clear coat. I sometimes feel like my hands are slipping. And so I didn't even necessarily buy these with the thought that, oh yeah, I was going to get natural just to try it out. I think just on a whim I bought them, and I love these mallets. I have a set of 4. I do a lot of 4-mallet marimba playing, especially in quarantine with these mallets. Okay, going on. Variation 2 to me is actually the hardest part of this etude, and it was the longest part this is the part that took me the longest to record. So it really changes from being left lead, like the first half of the etude, to a lot of right hand lead, but even that is not always automatically the case. So one thing you need to think about when it comes to the rolls on this etude is, like, if you look at measure 2, measure 6, you have rolls that are longer and they lead from roll to roll. Try to connect those rolls as much as possible. That should be your rule on this etude, and honestly, probably most of your 2-mallet playing anyways. So that should be the rule on playing the rolls in this etude. Variation 2 is going to break that up a little bit, partially because you have rolls that are not approached by rolls and don't lead to other rolls, and also you have some short rolls in this variation as well. So if you look at measure 17, you come out of a quick 16th note figure into a roll, and then you immediately stop rolling. That can be tricky. That was something I had to kind of work through and feel comfortable kind of turning off the roll switch. And then if you look at measure 18, you have a really short roll. At 60 beats a minute, that B flat roll may only be like 3 quick strokes before you have to get onto the G. So if you find yourself in a situation where you're rolling too long, or you just feel like you're too tense, or it's not going well, it's really hiccupy or herky jerky, just remember that as long as you have at least 3 notes, 4 notes if you can get it in there, that is going to be perceived as a roll, especially if the speed works within the tempo that you have. You can check the stickings in the next 2 measures. Now, I haven't said a lot about dynamics. The dynamics here on this piece, I think, tend to be, if the line is going up, the dynamic tends to go up, and vice versa. If the line is coming back down, the dynamics tend to fall along with it. So you're going to see a little bit of that in variation 2. But also, it seemed to me like there was a place in measure 20. Yeah, that decrescendo crescendo to me did not feel like the most natural thing to do. So really watch that. I think it's really important that you work on dynamics from the first time you practice the etude also. For percussionists, well, it's true for musicians of all stripes, but for percussionists, the way we move the mallets based on how loud or soft something is going to be really drastic. So if we learn everything at mezzo forte and then realize, oh, I'm supposed to be playing at piano, or I'm supposed to be at forte, and it's sustained for a long time, you're going to run into some physical issues trying to make that happen. So don't learn the piece independent of the dynamics. Maybe you can run through with notes and rhythms just to make sure you kind of know stickings, but then immediately start attacking dynamics too, or you'll notice that you just don't play dynamically as a player. There are a couple of little sticking things in there that I just set in there for your ability to see those, but I will address the little grace note figure that happens in 22. As much as possible, I try to play in the center of the bars unless I absolutely have to play at the edge. This is a place where that, B flat at the end of 22 really does require you to play at the edge. So edge notes don't sound as good as center notes. They certainly sound better than nodal points, so make sure you're staying off of the string. But also that note doesn't last for very long before you get into the next passage. The next passage is busy. That B flat's just going to be that long, and then you go on. And so I feel like that's a place where you can justify it. Also, speed-wise, it'd be really tricky to get all the way into the middle of the B flat. So you definitely want to play to the edge there. And then you're in just pretty wide open arpeggio situation after that. And then the 2 lefts on the B flat G are really helpful to prep the grace note A to G. A, of course, is going to be on the right hand. Then the attack the G on the left hand. Careful not to make the A to G sound like a flam, right? It really needs to sound like a different musical concept. Listen to the way I've played that. Listen to the way other musicians approach grace notes. We don't want those notes to be so close like we do in snare drum where it's flam, close, tight. We want there to be a little bit of space. And so that's also part of the reason that I wanted to do C, B flat, G, right, left, left, right, left, left, is to allow that A to have a little bit more life because I'm not having to come quickly off of a right hand. Okay, cool. Variation 3, to me, is easier than variation 2, partially because it starts on the right hand. Now, I have a note in 25 to hold your left hand at 90 degrees. So normally you come to the keyboard like this. But in this case, I found myself, and you can see it on the video, I found myself, because of the way you've got to come off C, A, D, A, F, and that's kind of in the left hand's real estate area, I found myself wanting to reach behind that mallet. We don't want to ever cross over. That's not I'm sure there's a time for it, but it's not here. And so instead of trying to do this and get the left hand out of the way, it seemed easier to keep the mallet in a really good place on the bar and move around it. And I just do it temporarily to allow myself to move in and out of that space that the left hand is occupying. So that's something that you can consider when you start that, is just jutting the wrist out a little bit and changing the angle of the mallet. Okay, all of this is really straightforward. They have done a really good service for you by putting accents in very predictable places. Where you're playing repeated A's with the left hand and the right hand is accented, that's probably what you would do anyways. So it's cool that they've given you a chance to let that just be part of what's asked of you. And then when you have those little scales up or arpeggios that are broken down, accenting at the beginning of those, that's what you would want to do normally. So don't feel like you're really jumping on those accents heavily. Just allow your hands to carry a normal weight behind it because you're starting. And if you're right-handed, and you always run into this problem that your right hand is heavy compared to your left hand, this is one of those places where you can make that work to your advantage. Okay, last couple of things. Measure 30. This is I really love this measure, but it took a while for me to get this. I used the same sort of trick of shifting the left hand angle up just a little bit to work through that on the grace notes. Now, they could have written this two ways, and the one way that they wrote it is strictly grace notes. The other way they could have written it was, instead of it being a dotted quarter note, which would take 3 beats, they could have made it a quarter note, which is 2 beats, and then instead of the dot, they could have notated it with 4 30-second notes. I think at the speed that it is, you end up having to essentially play it at that speed. 1, 2, da 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 dum, right? Or it'd actually be 1 la lita tata, I believe. I don't get a whole lot into 30-second note counting at 6/8, and I'm probably going to end up doing drum speak anyways. So it's da digga digga dum, yeah. So that also is musical sounding, but it gives you a real place to be able to dig those notes in and make sure that you're playing precisely at the right time, so that you land on big count 2 right after that. So C, D, C, B, C, D, and then this is weird. You want to move to the left on that B flat for the B flat. You want to put it on the left hand, but because 31 really needs to start on the left hand, you have to make an adjustment in 30, and that goes back to what I was talking about with the stickings earlier. You know, if that's where the piece ended and it ended at the end of measure 30, I have no doubt that probably 99 out of 100 percussionists would play that with the left hand. But because there's notes happening at 31, you have to consider the context of, okay, if I need to start here with left hand, I better put this note on the right hand to facilitate the sticking working across the entire context and that entire passage. Again, the decrescendo carries as the notes go lower, and then it raises as the notes go up. And then on the last note, I can't tell you how many times I forgot about the last note because sounds like the end. And then it would be like, oh yeah, and then hit that low F at the end. So I hope this has been helpful. I hope it kind of demystifies some of the things in the learning process, and it gives you some places where you feel like you have some help kind of getting this started. This actual annotated PDF is going to be available in the comments as a Dropbox link. Okay, so check that out, and happy practicing. Start slow. Okay, I'm serious. Start slow. All right, have a great practice session. See